Hello there, welcome to this session, What's in a Name, the science behind programme titles. So you've made a great TV show, now what the hell are you going to call it? Does it matter? Brief answer, yes. To do a longer answer, I'm joined by the following people. Hilary Rosen, who is the Deputy Director of Commissioning at UK TV, Benedict Windle, who is the Development Director at Noman UK, and then behavioural psychologist Philip Graves. It's tricky, isn't it, naming, Hilary?
It's not easy. There are some killer titles, but you know, some shows are titles in search of a show, and some shows are shows in search for title, I'd say.
Do you sometimes commission stuff on the basis of a very strong title?
I think a very strong title that immediately captivates a commissioning team or a group of people has a pretty good chance of getting to the next stage. I mean, it's not a shoe-in for a commission. I commissioned, when I first arrived at UK TV, a show called Singing in the Rainforest, and that show is coming out. It's coming to air this autumn, and that title immediately put a smile on all of our face. Obviously, it's a collaboration between big pop stars and tribal musicians. So we send big acts like the Happy Mondays to very remote places, and when they came in and they said singing in the rainforest,
when you send Happy Mondays to remote places, they do very well. Yeah.
So that felt like a sort of quite a special idea.
And Benedict, you work at Noman, not so much in TV, but naming products and so on. So how is it subtly different, your process?
Program titles, it's always very, very immediate. Where usually products, cars, for example, they're quite a long time in development, and so we do get quite a chance to sort of put some time in the naming. And then the naming is also only the tip of the iceberg, because you need to make sure culturally and linguistically they're correct, and also that they can be trademarked if required. So.
Yeah. And getting the name right is vitally important, isn't it, Philip?
It is, yeah, and there's a lot of psychology mixed up within names, both in terms of what works and in terms of how we grow connected to names in a way that can sometimes be unhelpful. And sometimes when you look at something from the outside in television and in other industries, you can look at it and think, how the heck did anyone think that was a good idea? Because it's clearly a stupid idea. And I brought along one example here, actually. You may not struggle with this, or you may immediately have a problem with it, and yet this went to market. And you look at it and you think, well, someone must have said something, and clearly they didn't. And this illustrates two things. One, that once we grow associations ourselves with something from the inside, as we do with a program, we know what it's about, we know what it's supposed to mean, we inextricably make something of that title. So it means something in our heads unconsciously that it doesn't mean to someone who's approaching it fresh, and that priming issue can be a big problem. And you know, the other issue is just in terms of how we evaluate things, that you know, if we consciously deliberate them, we can think things are okay. Actually, it's our automatic reaction quite often that's more important.
Are there any names that you've gone with that you've regretted, Hilary?
I can't think of a specific name that I would say we've regretted, but clearly some shows don't do very well, and then you might ask yourself the question, was there a problem with the title? In my experience, I can't think of a show that I've ever made or commissioned or been part of where I've thought that was such a bad title, no wonder that show didn't succeed. But I think a really good title can really nail a show, can really land a show. But I think, you know, when Janice commissioned The Great British Bake Off, I'm sure she wasn't thinking this is the most incredible title that anybody has ever brought to me. But you know, we all now know it's an incredible show. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's as simple as that.
But presumably it's quite hard to unpick that anyway, isn't it, Philip? Because it feels a bit chicken and egg to some extent. If it's a good show, then you'll start to feel fondly about the title.
It's a bit like naming a child. You know, once you come to know the child, then whatever name you give
I called it Wolf.
It will make perfect sense. But we have to think about the route that people take into programs. If you're doing a huge amount of marketing for a show and people are, essentially you're mapping associations onto that title, and then a title would have to be truly profoundly awful for it not to work, and you can call it pretty much anything. but where you're relying or hoping to get people at the point when they're flicking around, looking on the program guide, looking for something that grabs them, then the words that you use can be hugely important. And to give you one example of a program that I worked on several years ago, Belle de Jour, the blog, the character that was created, that was a book. The book had sold a few 100,000 copies. They were looking for a bigger audience on ITV2. And we changed that to Secrets, Diary of a Call Girl, because the word secret is unconsciously very interesting. And so you only have to hear someone whisper that. Someone said secret, is that okay? You tune into it before you ask yourself the question. So there are ways you can, within certain parameters, start to create titles that are more interesting to people.
And there's lots of examples, I think, of TV shows that we know have had different titles at a development stage, or actually quite a late stage before they've gone to air, that have gone on to be very successful. So Friends was called Across the Hall, I think, and 6 of 1, and Friends Like Us, and Lost was called Nowhere. Saved by the Bell was called Good Morning, Miss Bell, weirdly. I guess the big question is, would they have done as well with those alternate titles?
It's very hard to be definitive. I think in certain cases they would have lost out in terms of just attracting people at the outset. And the other thing is that the title works as a prime. And as we saw with Master Foods' creamy white finishing sauce, you kind of have an expectation of flavour for that product now, from the way that it's primed you, and I'm no interest in being specific here, but that priming effect has been demonstrated in psychology to be incredibly powerful, because what we think about something is very heavily influenced by where our mental journey is encouraged to start. And very often the name is where that mental journey is encouraged to start. So if you think it's naff or silly or daft, if you encounter something that's a bit silly or a bit daft early on in the program, that will reinforce that bias, and you may therefore start to lose some people as a result. And we're talking about margins here, but it can play a part.
Yeah, I've only just logged that the company's called Master Foods as well.
Doesn't help.
I mean, it's incredible stuff from them. So we've done a bespoke experiment to do with the naming of shows. Can you explain a bit about how we went into this, please, Philip?
Sure. We had an existing show that I think I'm right in saying, wasn't going to find a home in the UK, it seemed. So there was a show reel for it, and what we wanted to do was get some suggestions of titles, and we had 4 titles in the end that we could look at, and then evaluate those using some new approaches that look more at people's unconscious reaction to those titles than what they think about them at an explicit conscious level.
Okay, so we're going to show you that show reel, and then I might come to you and get some suggestions for names, and then we'll look at the ones that these guys came up with. Just shout out some suggestions. Huh? What? Set up, yeah. Fairly root one. Cruel to be kind's good. Cruel intentions.
Friends like these.
Oh, that's interesting. No pain, no gain.
Dreams and nightmares.
Dreams and nightmares. Any good ones? I mean, obviously, one of them is popular. Aside from the one that we've actually gone with, any good ones there?
I think Cruel to be kind is interesting. I think it's quite an evocative idea, quite an evocative concept, quite an intriguing concept. I think the word cruel is quite emotive instantly, so I think it would have been an interesting one to include in our test.
Cruel intentions, is it useful giving types of TV shows that people are already familiar with from a film, for example?
Can be problematic. It depends how salient the film is. When people are scanning the program guide looking for something to view, they do it incredibly quickly, and they use something called reflexive processing. So actually what they're doing is allowing their unconscious mind to make sense of the words that they see. So if that's a title that they are familiar with, and they then would dismiss it on the basis, okay, I've seen that film, or I've I know it's been around and I wasn't interested before, then they will essentially sail straight past your show. So it's a concept that I sometimes think of as borrowing equity. Sometimes that can be helpful depending on where you are on the EPG. Sometimes it can rule you out.
Okay, so let's have a look at the 4 titles that we went with. So the big surprise is the original title of the show. You won't believe the day I've had. That came from the advisory board here at the festival. So that's probably quite a typical way that a title would be come up with, a group of commissioners sitting around talking and then Zai overruling them. And then, so Nomen, so Benedict came up with, well, you tell me, what's that?
Well, that was one of 29 that we created. But Tom sort of tricked me into sort of being provocative. And
right. Is that, I mean, that immediately strikes me as problematic because I don't know what the title is. Like, if I say, oh, did you see that show? I'm not quite, I mean, this could be You Bollock. Probably isn't. But is that an issue, would you say, Philip?
There are two different aspects to it. It's hard to predict how people will react to it when they scan it, because we are used to seeing expletives reduced in some way so they're not explicit. Generally, when people are scanning something on a program guide, if they can't make sense of it, it's like it isn't there. And they need to automatically make sense of it. So it very much pivots with this one, on whether or not, as you scan that, you immediately, from newspapers and things we've seen where words have been asterisked out or whatever else, you fill in the blanks yourself, which we know the brain does do, or whether or not people are just confused by it and therefore leave it behind.
it was more an instinctive reaction to the show than an appropriate title. But when we present titles to our clients, we do give them a range. We don't just create one name, we create a whole range of names. And some of them, like this one, are meant to be provocative, are not necessarily appropriate, but to sort of reflect the reaction that you have when you watch the program, and perhaps that people would have watching the program, and intrigue, and it's not necessarily to be definitely sort of rude or...
And we have seen that where people struggle with a title, either because of its length or whatever else, they will come up with their own version of it. So Towie emerged from The Only Way is Essex. So people may well complete the dots themselves, and that could potentially become a very engaging fuel socially to make this program work and make it interesting across a bigger group.
And then the final title was With Friends Like These, thank you, from you at UK TV.
We had quite a violent reaction to this taster tape when we saw it, and it was quite interesting. I shared it with the team, and everybody went, "This is the most horrible show. Why would you ever do that?" And we got completely transfixed by the poor medical student who must have spent the best part of the day thinking he was, going to lose his scholarship and have to go home.
Yeah, because you never see a show like that on British TV.
Never. No one would ever commission a show like that.
No.
We did actually, whoever said Cruel to Be Kind, we did quite like that, but I thought we'd look deeply unimaginative if we chose a line, the title from a line of commentary in the taster. Actually, if we were going to commission a show like that for Watch, our entertainment channel, we would put the name... We would only commission a show like that if we had big talent to host it. So our big question, if someone bought us a show like that, if we liked it, we would say, who could we get to host it? And we would, if we could, to commission a show like that, it would rely on a production company being able to deliver to us a really big name, someone who is instantly recognisable, so someone like Davina. So let's say, for the sake of argument, we commissioned that show because Davina wanted to do it. We would absolutely use that capital, and we would put her name in the title, because where we sit in the EPG, it's very, very important for us, we feel, to be able to draw people down and go, okay, I don't quite know what that show is, but I absolutely know what the brand Davina is, and if it's got Davina, then I'm going to give it a go. So that's how we would have approached it. We would call it Davina's Worst Day, or Davina's Big Surprise, or we would give it that sense that Davina was driving this format, and she was sort of delivering an outcome for people. So that would be how we would approach it.
And is that usually a sensible thing to do, to use a name if you have it up front?
Absolutely. Depends how you do it. And what it's all about is tapping into existing associations. So clearly when you've got a person who's been around a fair amount, you've seen them on different... They immediately trigger associations in your brain. And that does two things. One, it makes it more attractive because it means something to you. And two, those associations will help build meaning into what it is you're looking at. The slight risk is that you may inadvertently tap into some strength of association that actually is not congruent with the show, and that's the thing that you need to be mindful of.
Yeah, so if you had John Travolta hosting, it's tricky. John Travolta's a Big Surprise, I'm thinking is a different show.
But Jeremy Kyle.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Let's commission it immediately. We've talked a lot about the EPG. Has that changed the way that we name programs? The fact that you have to think about what people are actually seeing when they're flicking through at pace, as opposed to looking in the Radio Times or whatever?
Absolutely, it's changed it massively. I did a project about 7 or 8 years ago with Alan Rafai, who was at ITV at the time, now at Sky. And the project was, how do people choose what they watch on television in the new age of fragmented viewing, as it was being described at the time. And one of the, what we did was then sort of psychoanalyze how people chose a program, because ITV at the time were having a problem where they were putting out a show that was ostensibly, they were happy with it, it was good, and it just wasn't being seen. And one of the conclusions we came back with is that titles are important. Now, I realise that's a bit like those studies that say faraway objects are harder to see and drugs and alcohol are bad for you, which are actually genuine studies, by the way. But what's more interesting is why titles are important. And that comes down to the way in which people are choosing. When, if you were to deliberately and deliberatively choose consciously from the number of titles that are available, you wouldn't get through the end of the list before all those programs had finished and you had to start again. And what humans do is they adapt and they develop unconscious skills to deal with routine tasks, and choosing a program, very routine task. So what people are doing is they are scanning incredibly quickly, and what I demonstrated was that people can look at a page of the program guide, even with just 10 programs on it, choose something, and then not have the faintest idea what else was there. Not a clue. You can say, I'll give you £1,000 if you tell me what's on BBC Two. Not any sense of it at all. And that's because they've not been involved consciously in evaluating what was there. It's their unconscious mind which has processed it all and come out with, okay, that is of interest to me. And if nothing there, it's a bit like when you're looking for your keys and you're scanning the room, you can look straight past them a few times because they're not the way round you thought they would be, or you kind of got in mind they'd be somewhere else. And it's that sort of processing. And with that, therefore, what matters is what the unconscious meaning of your title, much more than consciously, is it interesting or is it right? And that has implications for how we should evaluate titles.
And presumably, I mean, we know that position on EPG is significant. If you are lower down, that must influence the kind of titles that you're going to go for as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't really matter where you sit on the EPG. I think all channels are very obsessed with titles and try and think quite a lot about them and balance up the sort of creative ambition of the show with the sort of sell, if you like, the slightly sort of tartier way of trying to pull people in. I mean, something that we've had a lot of success with on Dave in the sort of recent years where we've commissioned more and more shows is very much to put the talent above the title. So we had one of the early examples of that was Dara O'Brien's School of Hard Sums. I mean, no one was begging us for a comedy math show, but Dara wanted to do...
Weirdly, I was. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
But Dara was absolutely passionate about this show. He is a mathematician by training, and when we commissioned the show, there was no way that we weren't going to put his name in the title, because we had to signal to our audience on Dave, who expect things to be funny and entertaining, that there was going to be a comedian within that show. And we've gone on, we've commissioned Alan Davis as Yet Untitled, Dave Gorman, Modern Life is Goodish, and the viewing figures seem to bear out that people love those shows. They instantly understand them. Those are recognisable pieces of talent. They've heard of those comedians, they know they're funny, they see them on the channel in other shows, and they come to them. So very much on Dave, there has been a journey where we've done that, but we're also now experimenting with commissioning things where we don't have one piece of key talent above the title. So we've just recently commissioned and broadcast Taskmaster, which is our new sort of hybrid panel game show, an anarchic show, and that's got 7 comedians in it, and Greg Davis is the Taskmaster, but we've also got Frank Skinner in that show, so it would have been fairly invidious to say this show just belongs to one of those 7 brilliantly talented people. So that's been a whole new direction, and so far it seems to be working, but it's always a risk, and there was a moment before the show went out when we all kind of looked at each other and went, oh, Taskmaster, you know, it doesn't mean anything. If your eyes are scanning the EPG, it's a meaningless proposition, so then all of your on and off air marketing and all of the press around the show have got to really sell in that idea. But channels hopefully get to a point where they can afford to have a mixed ecology of types of shows where some things are very clearly a sell, a person, a proposition, and other things are a bit more esoteric, and you're just hoping that people understand enough about the brand of your channel that they'll hopefully give it a chance. But as we know, it's a very competitive environment, so these things are quite risky.
Do you find that the working title of a show ends up sort of biasing you at all? So when you've just seen something called one thing for ages, you're just like, that's a good title, when maybe it isn't?
I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes. I mean, we're doing a property show at the moment, which is called Honey, I Bought the House, and it's a format where we separate couples and one of them leads the property search, and if they make a choice that their partner is happy with, we give them some money towards the deposit. We specifically have called that show, in the working title, the home show, because we don't want the contributors to know that the twist in the format is that there's going to be a moment where they agree to be on the show, and we say, actually, one of you is doing the search, and it's you. It's the one who's never logged on to a property website while their partner has, generally women, have spent all day fantasising about their first dream home. So sometimes, you know, there are practical reasons why you might go with a different title. I don't think you get emotionally wedded to a title. I think producers and commissioners, you know, not panic, but they worry a lot in the development of a show about what that perfect. You know, you might have a brilliant idea. You might just think, I just don't quite know what to call that show. We don't know what are those few words going to be that encapsulate the idea and will bring the audience in. So I think you'd be a fool to kind of get very wedded to a working title, because if the working title isn't going to do the job of attracting the audience, then you've got to jettison it.
Do you ever have problems where a creative involved in a show particularly wants to has an idea of what the title of the show is, and it's not a good title, and you've got to try and convince them otherwise?
Absolutely. And it tends to be people who've lived with the show the longest. And the problem that exists is that for them, they've created these associations in parallel, in tandem. They've had the idea, and so for them, that name is rich and meaningful. And the idea of casting it aside is akin to, you know, someone saying, oh, you've called your child a stupid name, you need to come up with a new one. It's like, well, no, because the whole life has been brought around that idea. So I think it's different for commissioners who perhaps have a more open mind from the start. And if you've got that doubt at the outset, then it's fine, because you have in mind, okay, we know what we're developing here, but we need to keep an eye on this, let's keep thinking, let's look for ideas as we go. But where people have lived with it and maybe given birth to the idea, they can really struggle to realise that actually the idea that has meaning for them is just nonsense to anybody else.
We get confronted to that problem a lot, because what happens is you build your brand. So, for example, we get lots of people who've started a business, have become a lot more successful than they thought they would be, so have started with a name. So the name they've given their business is very meaningful to them. They've lived with it, they've invested all of their ideas in it, and then they find that they're challenged because they've become a bit more global than they thought they would be. I've got a client in Nigeria at the moment who's like that, and it's very difficult then to rename their baby. It also happens when two big companies merge. We get to do a lot of new company names, and again, they might have lived with it for 100 years, and to just decide that we're going to be called something totally different from tomorrow. And then on top of that, if it's a merger where there's not equal partners or et cetera, and it creates a lot of problem. It's a question of, as you say, the emotional sort of binding onto a name, which we do extremely quickly, and which I have been faced, whether it's the program title or a startup company or a multinational. So
That's a universal problem because everyone has it with their first email address, right? You're just like, Jesus Christ, I cannot get business emails sent to Dre_Duards@hotmail.com. And yet, weirdly, that is happening. Yeah, I'd like Dr. Dre. I still don't want him in my email. Also, I guess that sometimes the thing that we're saying about people being attached to ideas, my friend is working on a show at the moment that is a science fiction drama. It's going to be fantastic. There's aliens, and the writer wants to call it Swansea, and he's like, why? It's not set in Swansea, and the guy's like, it might be. He's like, yeah, fine, but it isn't.
Actually, I've just had a flashback to being a producer for a million years, and I made a series for Channel 4 about a bunch of ex-cons who was setting up a flower shop, and they were trying to go straight. And we had a working title which we were absolutely passionate about, and Channel 4 insisted that we call the series Going Straight. And I'm sitting here and I'm racking my brains, and I cannot now remember what our working title was, but I remember hours in the pub of us all going, how can they do this? How can they change this name? So you're absolutely right. When you make shows and you come up with ideas and you feel deeply passionate about them, you do have a massive emotional investment in them. But I think it is useful for people to take those away, that title away, and look at it quite clinically, because the job of the channel is to sort of sell your show to the audience, and it's our job to try and get as many people to your show as physically possible. And if that means changing the title so that more people might come and try it, then that's only going to be a good thing.
We've had a look at some of the current trends in naming, which I think we can see on a slide here. A lot of people going with Britain, British, Brits. There's also a lot of new. I don't know if we can see the other. There's a lot of benefits. And actually, that on Channel 5, that's just for one day. What do these trends tell us? Why is, proclaiming everything to be British or Brits so popular at the moment, Philip?
We get onto bandwagons. We see this with all naming. Children's names. There'll be certain names that suddenly come out of nowhere and they're top of the heap. I was wondering actually with the Britain British one was whether or not that might be driven by the news, and that in the run up to the election and with the economy, we've had a lot of focus on Britain, and so that word has been in the ether a lot. And there was a study that was done in the US looking at the naming of children, that found out that very often people inadvertently name their children after hurricanes, because the name is in the press so much. And then what they did was they analysed the phonetic sounds in names that were popular, and they could trace it. So when Hurricane Katrina was around, in the next year you had a lot more children's names that had that hard K sound in it, and statistically they were able to prove the link. So it may be something as nebulous as the fact that there's a lot of Britain in the news in the run-up to an election, and that it permeates through, but also where you see success with a particular show and it's become enduring, Britain's Got Talent or whatever else, then people subconsciously want to tap into that, and it probably fuels both programme development and programme titling.
Yeah. When you say statistically prove a link, do you mean that, or do you mean show a correlation? Because they are
Well,
different, aren't they?
They are different, and the study proved the link beyond a correlation,
Right.
as far as they can, to take out all of the other, model all the variables out of it,
Right.
and say actually the only thing that we can account for this spike in naming is, now you'll understand, you're talking about statistical confidence there. You're not
Yeah.
talking about certainty,
Sure.
but within statistical terms, they proved the link.
And what about this this vogue at the moment for new in front of a lot of shows? See that on the, because as we were talking beforehand, there's an interesting sort of ruling, which is if you say new whatever on the EPG, that has to be the title of the show on TV as well.
That used to be the case.
Oh, it's not anymore?
No, that used to be the case.
Oh, okay.
And they've certainly, on the Sky platform, they've softened that ruling.
Right.
And certainly on our network, we do use the word new on the EPG for new commissions and new acquisitions, because we want to message to the potential audience
Right.
that this is a new show, it's not a repeat. But also when we recommission series, so if we recommission Dave Gorman, when the new series of Dave Gorman goes out, we'll use that as an opportunity to show some of the older episodes, and we want to be clear we want the audience to understand that these are new episodes, and within the
Old
schedule.
Dave Gorman.
There's,
Good idea. Yeah.
there's old and there's new.
Yeah.
So it's really, I suppose it's trying to give the audience as much information as possible so that they understand what it is that they're getting and how to differentiate between the multitude of shows that we've got in our network.
And so is new a useful prefix, do you think?
No.
No, very good.
We won't do
Keep talking.
It's a fact qualifier, i.e. it's like people who say their product is quality. That's fine. Sort of, we don't want to buy rubbish, so, and it's only new for a very short amount of time, and it's also only new. Usually you'll find that what says it's new is not really new, and in terms of innovative or different, or so there's that familiarity which is useful, sort of, yes, I've enjoyed new tricks, so the new tricks will be good to watch, but it's only instantaneous and it's very vague and it's just more like a sticker.
But do you not think for a sort of big fan of a particular show to understand that there are new episodes, fresh episodes that they won't have seen before, do you not think that's useful at all?
Not really, because if you're a big fan, you know that the next series is coming out.
But in the digital world, we're repeating things, so you won't necessarily know. I mean, if you're watching BBC One and they're trailing the new series of The Great British Bake Off, there'd have to be something pretty wrong with you not to have worked out that that's the new series. But that's the way in which the BBC schedule their shows. They're not a repeats business, so they're only bringing, that's a season, that's a moment in the schedule when the new series comes up. But if you're in another space, if you're in the world of UK TV where you're doing different things at the same time, so you're bringing new content, brand new, never been seen before, just as the terrestrial channels do, but you're within that schedule, you've got old either versions of that show or repeats of other shows. Do you really not think it's at all useful to signal that to the audience?
Yeah, no, of course, in that context it is of some use,
Yeah.
of course, because you're trying to do something which is different and which is new to you.
Yes.
So yes, definitely.
I was hoping that was going to escalate rather than sort of peter out. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Let's have a look at how we went about testing those names that we looked at,
Okay.
and the first
Well,
of that show, The Big Surprise.
right. Well, the place we might start, and the place traditionally, if you go to an insight team and say, "Oh, we've got a new show, not sure what we're going to call it. Could you find out which one of these is a good name?" And so we did that, and we found out that part of the brain liked the titles in those orders. So with Friends Like These was a reasonably comfortable winner. The only problem with this is it's asking the wrong part of the brain, because when it comes to reacting to a television title on a program guide, you don't get to watch the program first and then make sense of the name. You're reacting to the words that you see. So we need to approach this in a different way. Now, when it comes to the program guide, what we wanted to use were principles of implicit testing. Now, you are all implicit testers. Let me give you an example. You're going to a party with your significant other. She's wondering, what shall I wear? Gets dressed. Do I look all right? Now, we know that the answer to that question is yes.
No.
Always,
Shit.
But that's not enough. It can't be yes. It's got to be yes. Because we judge the speed of the reaction that we get with the words too. That we put the two together. Because we know if it's an automatic yes, or to complete the story which I've just told you, wonderful, because I was actually quoting Eric Clapton from Wonderful Tonight, and he clearly didn't say it fast enough. It's quite a slow song. He said it 4 times in the song, still ended up getting divorced. So that speed is really important, and we all know that. And there is a big difference when we are constructing an answer in terms of what our brain is doing from when we're just reacting. So there are a number of things we wanted to look at. And the first was, how well do these words stand out on a program guide? So we used a test which is to do with change blindness, where by changing the visibility of the title, we see how quickly people can find it. Now this is a very poor approximation of that because it's driven by the limitations of PowerPoint and what I can do. But within that, and testing the titles in different ways and with dummy titles, we can see which ones people find it easier to spot on a program guide. And this is apropos nothing. They've seen no marketing for the show, nothing else. And when we do that, we get something that's quite interesting. You won't believe the day I've had the potentially autobiographical title from the advisory board doesn't do very well. With Friends Like These and The Big Surprise, both perform moderately well, and UB really stands out. So we can demonstrate that actually, you know, and I was looking at it, I've done quite a lot of work in title testing, didn't know whether UB was going to be something people would gloss over, or does this act like a magnet for your show? Well, of the titles we tested, it has a magnetic effect. So the next thing we wanted to look at was, okay, people might notice a title, but what does it mean to them? And do they immediately extract some meaning about what sort of show this might be? And in qualitative work I've done, I've found that if people can't work out what sort of show it is, then that's a problem. And, you know, work it out meaning kind of automatically get it. So we wanted to see, did people realise that this was a hidden camera show? And what we found out was that a lot of people did think that The Big Surprise was a hidden camera show, but they weren't quite as certain of that in terms of their speed of response as they were with UB, where fewer people made the connection, slightly fewer people made that connection, but they were much more certain what type of show it would be. And the other two performed much less well, and people tend to think they were comedies. So probably driven by the word friends, in with Friends Like These. And I don't know whether they were scratching around, but you won't believe the day I've had. People thought, they tend to see that more as a comedy. So we're learning a little bit more now that now UB is performing very well for some people, and The Big Surprise is doing pretty well too. And remember, that was in the second tier in terms of its ability to cut through on the program guide. And then, of course, the next question is, well, how well do these titles fit with the experience of watching the show? And here we could use the clip. You can also do this with a description. And what you find out here is that people are certain that UB doesn't fit with the clip. And that's the strongest read that we get. And they're reasonably sure that The Big Surprise does, and the other two sit somewhere between. So when we take all of those elements together, and it's not clear-cut, because your first hurdle, if this isn't a program that you've got a huge marketing budget for, will be, can you get people to notice it? So you may think, actually, we're going to take the chance and go with the more provocative title to get that extra EPG hit. But my recommendation, based on the analysis we did, was that, as it happens, the original title that came in with the show, The Big Surprise, is the one that works the best.
Okay, we've got a few minutes just to do questions from the floor. If anyone would like to ask anything. Yes, gentleman here in the shirt.
When you were talking about U-Bitch standing out from the EPG as the first thing that people saw, what do you think was the reason for that? Is it the fact that most titles in the EPG are significantly longer? Is it the shape of the words as much as the contents of the words? How do you think that works?
I think it's to do with the automatic unconscious association. And I think my interpretation of this is there's a lot of people complete the UB title in their heads. And because they are automatically compelled to do that mental maths, if you like, and in much the same way if I say beans means, you are now thinking Heinz, you can't stop yourself. That's because of your unconscious mind, and obviously Heinz's multi-million-pound advertising budget over the years. But so I think that's why it worked, because people found themselves working out what that stood for, and as a result, they were drawn to it.
Okay. Time for a couple more, everyone. Yes, lady here.
Hi, you mentioned that the word secret is unconsciously very interesting. Off the top of your head, what sorts of other words have a similar effect?
Some of that is a matter of contemporary relevance. So if there's been a big news event and people have heard a lot about Iraq or Syria, then that, generally speaking, has a powerful impact because it's got salient recent associations. Other words that I've seen work well are words like millionaire, is attractive to us. So there are a whole host of them. It's the words that are personally resonant that tend to be most interesting. What will affect how you make your decision on the title is your viewing behaviour. There are still some people who are, in my experience, they're a minority who are heavy planners and who will still go through a list and circle things they want to watch, and they are choosing in a very conscious and deliberative way. There are also, because of technology, people now who are increasingly series recording things and sitting down, and the first thing they do is they go to their series record. So they have a different journey, and technology is reshaping this all the time. But that's more a matter of people's behaviour than it is class or social background, although that will have a bearing on what associations are most salient to you.
And presumably you think about your demographic when you're naming stuff, don't you, Hilary?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely, we've got niche channels which are trying to appeal. I mean, some of them are trying to appeal to, they're all trying to appeal to lots of people, but they're trying to appeal to different sections of the community. Absolutely, yeah. We of course we think about that, and we have a fantastic research department who endlessly are doing lots and lots of work around shows, who's watching them, who's watching other shows, what people like. We focus group all the time. Yeah, I mean, it's a serious business trying to work out what content will work for which people and why. But of course we all know that in the end, the best shows are those that defy all of that research and all of that analysis. There are shows, products, I'm sure, or cars or whatever, that just smash through, and you can retrospectively look at them and try and work out what it was about them that made them so fantastically popular and sticky and successful and talked about, whether it's The Apprentice or whatever some of these huge brands are. But you can't build shows from a kit of parts. You can't start there and go, right, we need Secret, we need Syria, we need Millionaire, we need this, we need Davina, we need whatever.
You can.
I'll leave that to you.
In our industry, it said you build a camel. Instead of definitely.
But you build a camel?
Yes, if you work too much on, or it should have this and that to attract a sort of.
You'll end up with a camel,
I
or
understand.
turkey, or a camel.
I mean, I like camels, so I'll be happy. Thank you very much to Hilary, Benedict and Philip. Enjoy the rest of your festival. Thanks for coming.